Here we are, Real Recovery Talk. I am your host, Tom Conrad. In today's episode, it is just me, no Benjamin B. today. First things first, thank you for tuning in on the podcast app, and thank you for watching on YouTube. In the end, if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, you could always reach us, Tom at realrecoverytalk.com and Ben at realrecoverytalk.com. And in the end, we want to help you turn your mess into your message. All right, in today's episode, I just want to discuss something, and I know I've brought this up in past episodes. So if you've already heard this, well, this isn't for you. But if you haven't listened to all 300 and some episodes that we've released, go back and listen to them. And but if you haven't, this is probably going to resonate with you in some capacity. What I want to talk about today is a few questions to ask when you are looking for treatment, whether for yourself or for a loved one. And I field calls all the time. I speak to a lot of parents. I speak to a lot of loved ones, and they do ask a lot of questions, but a lot of times they don't ask the questions that I would encourage people to ask because I think they're very important. And it's only 3 questions, but stay tuned to the end because I want to give you another pointer that I think is very important. So you got to listen to the end to get that. Now, the first question that I want you to ask whenever you are interviewing treatment centers, because essentially that's what you're doing, is I want you to ask them about their therapists, the people that are actually performing the therapy. Ask about them. What I want you to ask in particular, are they credentialed? Because you would be surprised. There are treatment centers out there that have therapists, and if you're not watching on YouTube, you can't see this, but I'm using air quotes. They're therapists, but they're not credentialed. They're not credentialed in any way. I don't know how it's possible, but they do this. So what you're looking for is somebody that is either a licensed mental health counselor, a licensed clinical social worker, and this is in the state of Florida. Now, whatever the credentialing is in your state, you'll have to look into that. But in the state of Florida, you have an LMHC, which is a licensed mental health counselor, and you have an LCSW, which is a licensed clinical social worker. And there's also licensed marriage and family therapists. You know, there's a lot of licensed clinicians. But I want you to make sure that they have some sort of license or credentialing behind their name. There are other credentialing that are good to have. Like myself, for instance, I have what's called a CAC, which is Certified Addiction Counselor. I got that through the Florida Certification Board some 10 years ago, and I have to maintain the CEUs every year to be able to maintain this credentialing. But I'll tell you what, it's not anywhere near what a licensed therapist has to go through in terms of schooling. What I did was at the time you had to work in the field for 4,000 hours, which is 2 years. And you had to have either an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree. And you had to do a lot, like some schooling, and then go and sit for a test. And ultimately, what took the longest for me was the work experience, the hours, the 4,000 hours in the field of addiction. And that took the longest. The schooling and stuff, that was relatively easy and didn't take a long time. But a licensed clinician, on the other hand, they are in school practically as long as a doctor is. So you have a 4-year undergrad degree, and that's generally in a related field, psychology or mental health or social work or something along those lines. And then they have a 2 years of a master's program. Sometimes you can do it in a year if you're in an accelerated program, but generally speaking, 2 years for a master's program. So 6 years of schooling. And then on top of that, they have an additional 2 years of supervision where they have another licensed clinician that is their supervisor. And this supervisor Their job is to meet with this intern once a week. I think it's once a week, and go over cases that they have and kind of see how things are going for them in their practice and so on and so forth. It's pretty intense, and not a lot of people want to go through that type of schooling. Everybody here at Rock, all of our therapists are either an LMHC, licensed mental health counselor, or a licensed clinical social worker. They're the ones doing all the individual therapy. They're the ones going way back into your childhood and using all these different these therapeutic processes, so on and so forth. So it's important when you're looking for treatment centers and you're asking questions and stuff, find out if they're licensed. And if they're not licensed, there is what's called a registered intern. Now, a registered intern is going to be that person within that 2 years of supervision. So they've completed all of their schooling. Now they're in the supervision stage of their licensure. And I would be okay with that as well. But they have to tell you that I'm not licensed yet, but I am a registered intern. And most insurance companies recognize that. So as long as there's a licensed clinician signing off on all the documentation, the notes, and stuff like that. So make sure you ask that. The second thing, and I think this is very, very, very important, is find out the size of the program. I can't tell you how many programs that I've been to that treat 100, 150 people, and it's like, it's crazy. There's people everywhere. Here at Rock, we treat 20 to 25. Sometimes our sweet spot is generally between 23 and 28. Sometimes we're on the low end, at the 21, 22. And then sometimes we get to that like 28, 29, 30 is the absolute max that we will take because we don't want our clinicians to have more than 10 people on their caseload at any given time. So that's very important because I think, and I'm a firm believer, the smaller the program, the more intimate that it's going to be, the more attention to detail that we can give each individual client. We can tend to their needs better. We can spend more time with them. If you have a program that is 100, 150 people, it's at that point, it's just like you're doing just enough to get by in terms of staff. Now, I'm not saying that there are all programs that are large like that are bad programs. I know many programs that are that size that are very good at what they do, but they're good at what they do because they're staffed appropriately and they are able to navigate those sorts of things in a very productive way. But for as many good ones there are, there's bad ones too, that you have 100, 150 people in your program and there's only 7 staff members there at any given time. That's behavioral health techs, maybe a nurse and a couple of therapists. I mean, it's crazy. So I think that is very important. Find out how many people are in the program. And just a question that you can ask, what is the staff to client ratio? And that'll give you a fairly good idea as to what it is. But 9 times out of 10, just being honest with you, if you're calling a large program, you're probably getting routed to a call center of some sort. And the person on the other end of the phone, they're not going to know the answer to that. Doesn't mean that it's not a good program. But again, here at Rock, our admissions team is myself, Ben, who's on the podcast with me all the time, and Destiny. You're going to speak to one of us 3, and we know everything about our program. So there's no question that you can't ask that we don't know the answer to. When you get involved in these very large programs, and you get routed to some sort of call room or a call center where there's an admissions person on the other end of the line, it doesn't mean they don't want to help you, but they may not know the ins and outs of the program because it's a massive, massive program and it's no fault of their own. It's just the way that it is. So make sure you ask that, find out the size of the program in and of itself, how many clients they have on an average basis at any given time. Now, in relation to that, I also want you to ask them, what are the sizes of the groups? Now, the groups, I've seen programs, again, large programs in scale that are running 25, 30 people inside of a group, 35, 40 even I've seen. That is nuts. That's crazy. The sweet spot in terms of group therapy is, in an ideal world, you want 8 to 12. Now, 8 to 12 is sometimes unrealistic. For us, we generally fall somewhere between 12 and 16. And that's manageable for us, actually 12 and 15 or 12 to 14, somewhere in there. But it really depends on like where our census is, how many people are in what level of care, so on and so forth. There's multiple factors that play into it, who's working, who's not working, stuff like that. But if they're running 25, 30 people, 35 people in a group, that's a hard pass. No way, because here's the thing. If you're sitting inside of a group with 25 people or 30 people, what's the likelihood? And if this group is only, let's say, an hour and a half long, what's the likelihood of the group facilitator going to be able to spend any time with you or give you the opportunity to process or whatever the case is? Very unlikely, because you got 30 people to get to. It just doesn't work. So a lot of times in that size of group, half the people don't even say nothing. And the other half, they say a few words or whatever the case is, and then boom, group time's over. No real therapeutic value there. And then you have people that they just want to hijack the group. And, you'll have a select 2 or 3 people. They'll talk all day long. You just let them talk and they'll burn through the group, no problem. And that's where it falls on the facilitator to have the wherewithal, the experience and the practice and the knowledge of how to properly run a group, how to navigate those situations, so people actually get value out of the group and not just go in there, sit there for an hour and a half or 2 hours and leave, and they don't get nothing out of it. So ask that question as well. How many people on average are in the groups at any given time? And that'll give you a good gauge. The last thing is, and this is, I think, just as important, what is the average length of stay within the program? Now, this is important because I see a lot of times treatment centers, what they'll do is they'll run you through the program until they don't. In other words, they find out, hey, the insurance company, they're no longer approving anything. They're no longer approving any days for you to be here. You got to go. And if you're a loved one and it's your son or daughter that is in treatment, the last thing that you want is to get a phone call and they say, hey, insurance isn't approving anymore. They have 24 hours to leave. What are the discharge plans? What do you want us to do? That is a scary situation to be in, but unfortunately it happens. So make sure you find out like what that looks like and find out, what is it going to be to, what's the plan? What's the plan whenever they're discharging? Because if you get that phone call and you don't have a plan put in place, you're going to be really stressed out. And when you're stressed out, your loved one becomes stressed out. And when your loved one becomes stressed out, they're in treatment. If they don't have a solid foundation of sobriety, what they're going to do is ultimately go back to what makes them most comfortable, is drugs and alcohol. Now, most treatment centers have a pretty good idea when it comes to length of stay. I've been doing this a long time. I know Blue Cross, Aetna, Cigna, United Healthcare, TRICARE, so on and so forth. I have a pretty good gauge as to how long somebody's going to be approved to be in treatment. But what I like to do with any parent or loved one that I speak to that's inquiring about our program, I want the expectations set on the very front end. hey, listen, you have Blue Cross Blue Shield. Based off of my experience working with Blue Cross, I think we're going to get approved X amount of days. I'll even go as far as tell you what I think we're going to get reimbursed. And based off of that, it's going to cost you X amount of dollars for them to stay here, however long. An average length of stay here is 90 to 120 days. That's what we like to keep clients for. So the expectations are put on the front end. Now, if the insurance company surprises me, they pay me, way more than anticipated, great. We have a conversation around that. If they pay us way under that we anticipated, we have a conversation around that. The point is, communication is there. I'm never going to call you and say, hey, your son or daughter, the insurance cut out, they have to leave tomorrow. What do you want us to do? How would you like to handle this? It's unfair to you and it's unfair to the client. The treatment center is going to be, or they're the ones that are responsible for making sure that there's a proper discharge plan put in place. So that involves communication. That involves, constant check-ins. And, we're in communication with the insurance companies all the time. We have a good idea as to how this is going to play out. So keep that in mind. Find out what the average length of stay is. Now, I told you I was going to leave you with something at the end. And I think above all, this is extremely important. Do not get wrapped up in the details. I see this way too often where a parent or a loved one knows that their child needs to go to treatment. And what they do is they go on Google and type in addiction treatment near me, and 20 places pop up, and they just start calling one by one by one and asking a whole grocery list or a laundry list, whatever the right phrase is, of questions to each treatment center. Now, I'll tell you this, the treatment center, generally speaking, is going to spend as much time as they need to on the phone with you to earn your business, because in the end, treatment centers are businesses. They are making money and they want to earn your business. So most of the time, they're going to spend the time on the phone with you. The problem is if you do that with, say, 20 treatment centers, and you say you do 2 treatment centers a day, you call 2 treatment centers in a day, and you call 20 treatment centers, a week and a half can go by and no decisions made. Because now you have 20 treatment centers that you called, you have all this information, and ultimately you do nothing. Or it just takes way too long for you to make a decision. What I tell people to do, read the reviews on Google. Generally speaking, if they're in the 4-star, 4 and up, and they have a decent amount of reviews, they're going to be worth giving a call. Read the reviews, have some main bullet points as to what is most important for you. And I would encourage you, the ones that I just gave you, ask those because I think they're very important, and ask a couple more for you. Is there a family program involved? How often am I able to communicate with my loved ones, so on and so forth? Find out what those questions are for you, and that is it. And call 3, 4, maybe 5 treatment centers and make a decision based off of that. Because the more that you interview these places, the longer that it takes. In today's day and age, we do not have that kind of time. If they're a severe drug addict, you know as well as I do, the fentanyl that is in this country right now, people are overdosing and dying on a daily basis. It's sad, but it's the reality of it. So you don't have a week to mess around to try and make the right decision. Find what treatment centers you think are going to be worth the phone call. Call them, ask a few questions, and make a decision. Get them on a plane, get them in the car, get them on a train, whatever you got to do, get them to treatment. Once they're in treatment, breathe. You can relax, get a good night's rest, and then start thinking of the discharge plan, okay? They've only been in treatment for 2 days, but I want to start thinking about, okay, what's it going to look like when it's time for them to come home? Be involved with the therapist, get involved with the case manager, have a plan put in place, because if they are coming home, you want to make sure you are prepared for that. In 30, 60, 90, 120 days, that goes by very, very quick, and you want to be prepared for it. So that is it. I hope that helps. If you have any questions, by all means, you could reach us, tom@realrecoverytalk.com and ben@realrecoverytalk.com. We'll be happy to talk to you about your specific situation. If we can help you here, we will. If we can't, we'll do our darndest to help as best as we can. But the main thing is to reach out and get some guidance from people that know what they're doing. And ultimately, we want to help you turn your mess into your message. That is it. We will see y'all later.